Good start. I know a lot of you, because we've had a good morning going so far, have warmed up quite a bit, so you're kind of hot, so you want things cooled down, right? Oh, wait, no, actually, they're working on getting the temperature turned up in here for you. I know some people have been cold. Okay, I make this announcement. It's up here too. Okay, so there's an announcement up here. So apparently, due to hotel renovations that are going on, the restrooms on the mezzanine level, is that this level? Okay, this level will be closed from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. So I guess that means maybe they're already closed at this point for a bit. So you can certainly use the restrooms located in lobby level on the harbor side, which is just down the escalators and then kind of over this way, I think, underneath us. So anyway, I wanted to start off here and kind of tell a quick story I guess, introducing our next keynote. It goes like this. So from a Toyota perspective, most people that have been involved or are involved with Lean, we do a lot of Kaizen activity on the shop floor and all that. And that's certainly important and critical. The interesting thing about it from a Toyota perspective is they certainly do that, obviously. That's where it came from. But for them, the financial impact is only about 15%. Not the 15% in a corporation that big is chump change, but it's still a small percent. But the reason that's important to them is because the activity, the Kaizen activity, the improvement activity, the way they develop people and train people in that is important to them, isn't so much from the financial perspective, although it certainly is important and important from the customer delivery standpoint. But the reason it's important to them is that's how they develop their people. So as these people come in and get that experience on the shop floor, that intimacy with the shop floor and what they do, as they rise up into plant managers, into chief engineers and so forth, they have that intimacy with the shop floor. They understand the system. That's why it's important. So when they get up in these higher levels and now they're impacting the 85% from a financial perspective, that's why that's important. So also, why is that important? I don't know if you remember when I was up here at first thing, I talked about the black box perspective. And essentially, a good portion of that black box is the process and product development perspective. So that's why this stuff becomes so important to them. And because 85% of the financial impact is at that higher level, that financial impact and those people. And I will say this, really outside of Toyota, and certainly even within the Lean community, this is an area that we just really haven't ventured into yet. So of course, most of you are financial accounting folks. This is really the frontier that we need to get involved in, not only just from the Lean enterprise standpoint, which we've been talking about yesterday and today, but from a financial impact. We have really yet to get into this 85% of a financial improvement that's out there yet. So that's what I'd really like to see upcoming over the next number of years, that really becomes predominant for us, not only the financial people leading that, but for the Lean enterprise overall. So our keynote this morning is Dr. Jim Morgan. He's the president of the EMC Network and also a senior advisor at the Lean Enterprise Institute, and particularly obviously focusing on process and product development. He's a former director of global body exterior for the Ford Motor Company, and also the co-author of the Shingo Prize-winning book, The Toyota Product Development System, that he co-authored with Dr. Jeff Liker. So needless to say, Jim Morgan is a wealth of knowledge and experience. So please welcome Dr. Jim Morgan.
Good morning. Come on, you guys are going to give finance people a bad name. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. First thing is, Dwayne asked me to make an announcement and to let you know that there's absolutely no truth to the rumor that the reason the temperatures are so low is because they're trying to sell Lean Frontiers jackets. There's nothing to do with it. So first I'd like to thank Dwayne and Jim for inviting me down here to join you in beautiful Savannah. It's just a gorgeous town. I don't know how many of you got a chance to go out last night, but it's a great place to eat and visit. I always enjoy it down here. But when they first asked me to come down and speak, I actually had a couple of reservations. The first one was, would a bunch of finance people be interested in anything that an old engineer has to say about product development. And while that remains to be seen, I did recall how important it was to work with my finance partners at Ford to achieve the results that we did. Guys like Bob Shanks and Dave Schock were not only razor-sharp finance people, but they had a passion for the product and they cared deeply about the business. And building those partnerships were really key to everything that we did. Bob has gone on to become the CFO at Ford, and Dave Schock is actually running Ford's Asia Pacific operations now. But I know that that same spirit continues to exist at Ford, and I know how key it is to build those partnerships. The second reservation I had was this whole idea of predicting the future. To be honest, I really didn't think I was up for the job, especially if you look at my football pools so far this year. Not so good at predicting the future. But then I thought about what Peter Drucker had to say about predicting the future. One of the preeminent business thinkers of our time said, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And in some sense, that's exactly what product and process development are about, right? Every time you develop a new product, you have an opportunity to change the trajectory of the company, to change the future, not only for your company, but sometimes your industry and even further. And there's lots of examples of people who had done this. Joe Sutter and his team took an idea that many people thought were impossible and created the 747 and changed the way people traveled around the world. When the Toyota guys announced that they were going to build a luxury car, I can tell you the auto industry was really skeptical. In fact, in Europe, where they had dominated this space for years, they actually ignored Toyota's efforts, much to their detriment, actually, because they not only built a great product, they built a great company and completely changed that industry. Sergey Brin and Larry Page put the world's information a click away and created a new verb in the English language, to Google. And Steve Jobs not only put 1,000 songs in our pockets, but he really did put a dent in the universe and changed the way many of us live every day. And the Ford Motor Company, a company that was on corporate death watch, who all of the experts predicted would cease to exist, not only is creating great products, but it's dominating in a space where people thought Ford could never be successful, in small cars. The Focus is the best-selling car on the planet right now. Unfortunately, as I've gotten a chance to meet other companies and talk to other people, product development is not like that at their companies. In fact, they talk to me about programs that are always over cost, that are always late, launch nightmares, designing things that absolutely can't be made in manufacturing. And instead of bringing the organization together, it actually acts as a divisive force. And so product development launches are something to be endured, right? It's not seen as the opportunity that it could be. And worse than all of this is the products seem to always fall short of expectations. Now, you can argue that they're also still creating the future, just maybe not such a good one. The good news is that more and more companies are starting to work in this space. They're recognizing the incredible potential of product development. And even though it's difficult to work on, they're doing what's necessary to improve in this space. And that's because of how powerful product development is, as Jim mentioned in the introduction. It's the one place where you can not only have a huge impact on the top line, you can drive company growth with the right product, but you can have the maximum impact on your costs. 60 to 70% of the costs of most companies are determined during the product and process development process. So many times when you're trying to do shop floor kaizens, right, it's so frustrating because it feels a little bit like you're just sort of nibbling around the edges. And you say, gee whiz, right? I wish we could have all worked together back in the beginning, and what a difference it would have made. And so that's the opportunity that product development offers. And what's more, it's a unique, maybe even a one-of-a-kind opportunity to bring the organization together, right? Product development is not an engineering thing. It requires collaboration by engineering, manufacturing, finance, HR. All of those functions have to come together in order to create great products. Excuse me. And it also gets your organization focused on the customer. And that level of focus and collaboration can become a competitive advantage in and of itself, even beyond the product development spectrum. And most of these companies are working with lean in product development because it's more than just a strategy for a single hit product. It's about creating a sustainable system for delivering value streams, right? All of the tasks required to bring that product to your customer. And in order to do that, it focuses on developing people and products simultaneously and building a stronger organization. And I would argue it should be a centerpiece of most organizations' strategies. Product development, lean in product development is not new, although its sort of popularity has increased recently. There's a long history of research, starting with Al Ward in the 80s and his set-based recursive design work at MIT. It was in The Machine That Changed the World. I always ask this question. How many of you read The Machine? Yeah. For those of you who haven't, you should really read it. It's what started all this, right? It's really what started all this discussion about lean, and it's still a great read even today. That led to some work that Taka Fujimoto and Kim Clark did at Harvard around product development performance, primarily focusing on Toyota, and then a series of studies at the University of Michigan by guys like Jeff Leiker, Alan Ward, Gerward Sobek, Pat Hammett, and then a study that I did, which is a 3-year comparison study between Toyota and their North American competitors, that found that not only was Toyota far better at product development, but the way they approached product development was profoundly different than their competitors. And then more recently, there was a study in 2011 done by Hopman and a group of researchers at ETH Zurich and MIT that found that the characteristics that we described were highly associated with success in product development in over 440 companies across, I think, about a dozen different industries. But more important than the research are the companies that are trying lean product development are having huge success. Pfizer delivered about $500 million in top-line growth while simultaneously cutting costs by $30 million. Goodyear went from 27% of programs on time to 90%, and then over time reduced their lead time by 70%. IBM delivered a 30% increase in smartphone chip capability on a program that took about half the time of a normal program. And Menlo Innovations, much like their namesake, has really become a bastion of innovation. It's an incredible place. Have any of you heard Rich Sheridan speak? Yeah? Or read the Joy Inc. book? It's fantastic stuff. And if you get a chance to be in the Ann Arbor area, I would highly recommend you stop in and see the guys at Menlo. It's great. And then my own experience at the Ford Motor Company, which I'll talk a little bit about. So you think back in time, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, we weren't sure if we were going to have a U.S. auto industry anymore, right? I got to Ford about a year before Alan did. Alan Mullally arrived, and that year we had $17 billion in losses, right? $17 billion. We've been losing market share for 20 years. We've been fundamentally going out of business for 20 years. Our stock was down to about $1.90. I think it was even lower than that at one point. Our suppliers were going bankrupt so quickly that we actually had to create a war room. My match pair and I, the director for global purchasing for the commodities we engineered, and I had to create a war room just to figure out who we had to shovel money at just to keep our plants running, right? And of course, 2 of our competitors did go bankrupt during that time. And depending on who you listen to, even Ford was within about 12 or 14 months of running out of cash. Yeah? The culture was terrible. We spent more time competing with each other inside than we did competing with our competitors outside of the company. And we were laying off a lot of really good people. And by far, the toughest professional thing I had to go through was having to lay off about a third of our engineering organization, right? People who, through no fault of their own, were losing their jobs because we didn't have products that people wanted and would buy, yeah? And of course, Alan went to Wall Street, took out a $23 billion loan. He leveraged everything in the company, including the Blue Oval, in order to get that money. Fortunately, especially for me, it has a happy ending. Last year, Ford's profit was about $8.5 billion. 4 consecutive years of market share increase. Stock's at, I think it's slightly lower than that this morning, but it's ranging between 18 and 15 bucks a share. Our supply base is stronger than ever, and our relationship with them is better. The one Ford spirit that Alan brought, that collaboration I talked about across the organization, was more than a buzzword. It was real. And it's how we went about doing our work every day. And of course, Ford's biggest problem now is hiring fast enough, especially qualified people in technical areas. And while that story is fairly well known, what's less well known, I think, is that it was all about product. It was absolutely a product-driven revitalization of the organization. When Alan came back from Wall Street with that loan, we had a lot of needs at Ford. Our equipment was old, our plants were leaky, our engineering spaces were god-awful, right? And so the easy thing to do was to just take that pile of money and divide it up, right, across the functions that really needed money. But Alan could see that that was going to do nothing but prolong the inevitable, right? It was just going to buy us time. Yeah? It wasn't going to change anything. And he was smart enough to see, and courageous enough to make the decision, that if we didn't get products that people would actually buy, all the rest of this was really not going to matter. Yeah? And so he basically handed a pile of money to my boss, Derek Kuzak, and said, you guys got to go figure out what we need in the way of products. And so that required us to develop an all-new global product development process, because all of the various engineering centers around the world were working to their own process, which didn't let us do things like having common platforms for cars like the Focus and allow us to achieve the sales levels and cost savings that we did. We had to change our organizations. All of our skill teams became global, right? One of Alan's first insights when he came to the company was, I always thought Ford was a global company, but it turns out that it's really just a collection of regional companies that all happen to be carrying around the same business cards. And we're going to figure out how to work together, and the first step in doing that is changing these organizations. And then we went about reinventing the entire global portfolio. So I'm going to take a step down now and talk more specifically about what happened in my organization and how we supported this effort. The group that I led while I was at Ford was the Global Body, Safety, and Stamping Engineering Group. We were basically responsible for the body structure and basically all the parts you see on the outside of the car except the tires and wheels. So the sheet metal, the glass, the trim, lights, that sort of thing. And I'm going to organize this discussion in the system that I mentioned earlier, people, process, and tools, because I see this as a very powerful system that when you align those elements, ends up with a very powerful result. And I'll start with people, and that's on purpose because that is by far the most important element in great product development. In fact, I don't know this, but I would guess that's probably true for the rest of the organization as well. I'll start with the chief engineer. It's probably the best known sort of attribute of the lean product development. The chief engineer is the person that is fully responsible for the delivery of a specific product. Everything from the beginning to the end, right? All of the attribute trade-offs that have to be made, all of the decisions that inherently go into developing a system that's made up of a bunch of components the chief engineer owns. Yeah? They own everything from the design to the profitability of the product in the end. And while it's absolutely a critical position, it's also really tough to create these people. And our success rate early on at Ford was not so good. Yeah? We had a lot of really good people that struggled in these positions because we hadn't figured out how to develop them. We hadn't created an infrastructure that would support that activity. And so when you think about chief engineers, you also need to think about the system that goes into creating and supporting them. Typically groomed as super engineers, superb leaders with high levels of business acumen, right? And finding that combination of people in the engineering group can be a bit challenging, right? You know the joke about the extroverted engineer, right? He looks at your shoes when he's talking. They're also in a tough position, right? They have this huge responsibility for this product, but they don't have a lot of authority. The bulk of the resources that are working on their product reside in the functional organizations. The chief engineer in the automotive industry might have a team of, depending on how big it is, 6 to 10 to 12 people, right? The functions are thousands of people, right? And the functional folks working on these parts report to, and their career path depends on, the functional leadership. So that can be really challenging for the chief engineer to influence, right, the development of this product. Consequently, the successful ones tend to have very strong personalities. They're completely unreasonable, very demanding, but it's always focused on the product. And I think, the sort of stereotypical chief engineer is Steve Jobs, right? And that drive for product greatness is absolutely critical in great chief engineers. They represent the voice of the customer. It's their job to understand what the product has to be. And the functions have to figure out how to deliver that, right? So the chief engineer is what, and the functions are how. But still, his success or her success depends on the functional organizations. The battery dying up here? It's not, I am. There we go. Functional organizations like body engineering, electrical engineering, chassis engineering, manufacturing, right? They're responsible to be the best in the world at their particular discipline and to understand the competitive landscape in order to deliver the vision of the chief engineer. Yeah? It's a real rogues gallery up there. Anyway, they are responsible for the learning that takes place across programs. Yeah? So it's absolutely critical part of the organization. At Ford, we actually went a step further. We organized around the value stream, and we combined some organizations that typically weren't together. We put body engineering, which is typically PD, safety, which is usually part of corporate safety, and the stamping group and tool shops into a single organization so that we owned, or we're responsible for everything from the clay in the studio to launching the plant. But functions are only as good as their people. And so we had to spend a lot of time thinking about how best to develop our folks. Prior to this, we weren't very good at that. Ford would go out and hire the very best engineers from the very best universities. Ford has a lot of brand recognition and could attract some really high potential students to the organization. And they would go through their 3 to 4 day orientation, and we'd say, there's your cube, see you at the next design review, right? And we thought that was our sort of investment level that we needed with these people, and they were really smart, so they would figure it out. Their viewpoint at the time wasn't helping matters. Their idea was I would join Ford with an engineering degree, work a couple years, get an MBA, become vice president, and live happily ever after, right? And in the meantime, I would move around as much as I possibly could because that was the best way to get promoted. Okay? What happens is you never develop the deep technical competence, the deep technical expertise that's required in making great products. And so we worked really hard with our HR partners to develop a different kind of a system. We first honored the technical excellence and contribution of these people. In the prior regime, right, it was all about sort of business deliverables, yeah, as opposed to really what it takes to create great products. And so we needed to recognize and reward the contribution of these people. And then we developed some tools that helped to do that. TMM, or technical maturity models, were developed for each of the disciplines, It outlined the skill sets and the types of assignments and training that engineers needed to progress through. Typically took about 8 years to create a good body engineer. We developed ITDPs, individual technical development plans, so we could sit with our engineers a couple times a year and talk about their technical development and opportunities to learn. We focused on mentoring because a lot of what you learn is on the job, right? It's being mentored by engineers who have already been through this before. Incidentally, that's another problem with engineers that move around all the time. When people are moving all the time, your supervisor, who developed into that position the same way you got there, likely doesn't know any more about the job than you do, right? So how do you create this technical mastery that we're looking for? We had to have strong functional organizations and a structure to develop the next generation of engineers. But more than just the structure and the formal approach, we need to think about where was our opportunities to develop engineers in the way we did our work every day. And one of those opportunities was in design reviews. Design reviews, I found, are often overlooked or ignored opportunity to really develop people. To not only see the solution that your engineer is suggesting to you, but see how they're thinking about that solution, right? To sort of like the teacher used to say, show your work, right? And the design reviews are the opportunity to do that. They need to be cross-functional. Our design reviews had manufacturing guys in there, PD guys in there, finance people in there. Everybody participated in these discussions. One of the main goals was to demonstrate efficient design. And efficient design starts with understanding how you deliver value to the customer, right? If you don't understand that, it's impossible to judge whether design is efficient. Once those attributes are understood, now you can talk about, are you delivering this in the most efficient way possible? And that is the building blocks of target costing, right? And how you deliver to targets on programs. The design reviews were rigorous, candid. The engineers weren't too crazy about them at first. They were very difficult, right? It's okay to create conflict. In fact, one of my Toyota mentors told me a long time ago, it takes a lot of conflict to create a great car, right? If you don't have people who care passionately about their discipline and their perspective, you're not going to end up with a great product. But we found as long as we were consistent in our expectations for our engineers, right, they would grow and adapt and very often exceed those expectations. So that also kept leadership on the ball, right? And so it turns out design reviews are not only a great way to develop products and people, it's a great way to grow better leaders. Ask questions. A big tip for running design reviews. The easy thing, just like when your kids, it's easy to bend down and tie their shoe instead of teaching them how to tie their shoe. The problem is that, they never learn to tie their shoe. When you tell engineers the answer, right, when you say just upgauge that or just change this material spec, then all of a sudden you own it, right? And they're not developing. So asking questions is absolutely key. Use the scientific method. Don't debate things to death. Think of a way to experiment. Go test your hypothesis. Find out. Because we don't want the best debater to win. We want the best solution to win. And then make sure that you capture the knowledge. Knowledge is almost as important as the product you're developing, right? And when you think about people, you need to think about the entire enterprise, even those folks that reside outside of the four walls of the company. And for us, that was the UAW and our suppliers. Our relationship at that time with the UAW was not great. I think that's probably no secret. Both sides had broken trust over the years, and so we had to spend a lot of time working on that. Once we did that, we found that the union leadership was actually more proactive and more helpful in a lot of the changes that we made than some of our middle management was, right? It was about sharing openly and understanding what it is and why we're trying to do something. Yeah? The other side is our suppliers, and we have, I'm not sure if that graph is readable from there, but you can see when we started out on this journey, we had the lowest rating with our suppliers, right? Even though suppliers provide about 70% of every vehicle going down the assembly line, right? We had a terrible relationship with them. It was very antagonistic. So do you think we got their best people, their best technology, their best quality? Of course we didn't. right? And having once been a supplier, I also know that you pay a premium for being hard to work with, right? There was that Ford pain in the you-know-what premium that you had to pay because nobody wanted to work with you. And so we worked really hard to build a stronger relationship with our suppliers. And that started with building a better relationship with purchasing. Purchasing and engineering didn't get along very well, didn't have very aligned objectives, right? And didn't even really communicate very often. And consequently, that made life really difficult for our suppliers. They weren't even sure who to listen to, right? Engineering would say, I want this and this and this and this, and purchasing would say, that's fine, but I'm not paying for any of that, right? Who do you think they listened to? And so we put a match pair process in place that matched up people in purchasing. My match pair was the director for global purchasing. Our chiefs had a manager they were matched up with on each of the components that they designed and purchased on the outside, whether it was raw material or finished parts. And we developed a common strategy, a single voice, and a common set of priorities and objectives for the year. And it made a radical difference. It speeded up decision making, it improved decision making, and it led to innovations like the ABF agreements, which were long-term agreements with key suppliers, where we could share insights into our overall strategy and get them on board early enough to make a difference. So process. You can think of a lean product development process in sort of 3 chunks. Oops. Obviously don't have this down yet. The first chunk is to deeply understand what the product needs to be. This is so critical to get this right, and it's often overlooked in our efforts to become more and more efficient. If you don't understand what the product needs to be, if you don't create a product that people want, then everything else is waste by definition, right? So it's critical to get this right. And there's a few steps that you can take, immersing yourself in the environment. It's more than just a marketing study. It's more than just looking at data or sending out questionnaires to your customer. The chief engineer and their team immerse themselves in the product environment. At Menlo, they use high-tech anthropologists. It's awesome, where they just really study not only the product and the customer, but the context in which they're using that to look for opportunities to understand the unique value potential of this particular product. Once you have a strong vision for what the product needs to be, then you need to communicate it to the rest of the organization. The Chief Engineer Concept Paper is a great way to do that. And that concept paper at the beginning is really a vision of what the product needs to be, but it acts as a contract throughout the development to fight things like scope creep, right? To make sure that people continue to work together, because it identifies not only what the product needs to be, but everybody's roles and responsibilities in delivering that product. Okay? Once you understand that, then you can start to apply powerful lean concepts to improve your execution, to shorten your lead time, and then focus on learning and reflection in the process. While the chief engineer is busy understanding what the product overall needs to be, the functions are trying to deeply understand how best to deliver that. Remember, you have the what and then the how. One of the key tools in that is monosecurity. And that's where, as a cross-functional group, again, with suppliers, with finance, with manufacturing, you tear down your own and your competitor vehicles. Teardowns are nothing new. Most good companies do teardowns. But remember, it's not always the what you do, it's the how you do it, and the level of detail that you spend in doing those teardowns and mapping costs to value. Understanding what it takes to deliver a specific value and whether that's important in the process, and getting cross-functional engagement in that. By the end of this presentation, I'll get this done. But obviously not yet. The other thing is to apply a set-based approach. Traditionally in engineering, we've used an iterative approach. There's this sort of natural tendency that engineers have to get to the solution. Maybe there's a natural tendency for everybody, but for engineers in particular, they want to answer the question, here's the solution. And then we iterate on that over time, right? improving it as we learn new stuff. SetBase, which was originally developed by Al Ward, says, no, look more broadly at a bunch of alternatives. Think about different ways to solve this particular design challenge. Yeah? And then converge over time by eliminating some, by taking attributes from one and adding to another one, and ending up over time with a much better solution. But it's really difficult to get engineers to think this way, especially on a timeline, right? When they're up against the clock and you have to deliver a product. And so one of the things we put in place was a simple Excel spreadsheet we called an attachment C. And in the early part of the process, we required the engineers to come to the design reviews with 6 different alternative proposals for the same design solution. And we would put those across the top, and then down the y-axis, we would grade those against critical attributes. Those might be cost or weight or supplier footprint or whatever it might be that's important to that particular part. And we would evaluate them, and we converge on a design strategy. But by making this a requirement in the early part of development, we changed the way people thought about their design challenges. Now that we understand what it is we're going to deliver, it's about creating flow. It's about speed and precision and shortening your lead time, right? Speed is a powerful competitive advantage. It's hard to match up with fast companies. Now, I'm not going to go through this whole list. I just wanted to identify that there are techniques and methodologies all the way from understanding your process capability, which most companies don't in product development, and therefore don't really understand their capacity in product development, to detailed scheduling and powerful systems of standards. But there are 2 key things that I just want to mention briefly. The first one is to tightly synchronize cross-functional activities, better known as concurrent engineering, right? Doing work simultaneously. But it turns out that companies seldom do this very well because they don't really understand the details of the work, right? And so it's critical that you understand the way the work gets done so that you can see the interdependencies across these functions, and so that you can do more and more with less and less and overlap these activities to a greater degree. That was the single biggest thing we did to reduce lead time, was to do more simultaneously, but to do it smartly so it doesn't just lead to a ton of rework later on. The other important insight that we got was around compatibility before completion. In the early days of trying to reduce our lead time, we said, okay, we just have to go faster, right? And what we see is always the problem is those darn engineers, their releases are always late. And so we're going to make our key metric releases on time. We're going to post that everywhere, and we're going to, right? And so guess what happened? We improved our releases, right? Engineers aren't stupid, at least most of them. And they realized that they needed to release on time. What was happening, though, is they weren't compatible with the rest of the system, either with manufacturing, with supplier requirements, with interdependent parts in the system. And so we were getting a ton of late engineering changes. And overall, it actually took us longer and was much more expensive. And so we built into the system compatibility checks to make sure that when a release is done, it's compatible with the rest of the system, whether that's manufacturing, serviceability, or any other element of that part. And then powerful global standards. We worked on standards in architecture, in platforms, in manufacturing, in development. The 2 points I want to make here is, number one, the Henry Ford quote on the bottom I think is great. You need to build in a continuous improvement process. That's part of the standards. Standards aren't meant to stagnate, right? The other thing is that you need to define fixed and flexible areas of the solution. So what can be open to creativity, right? The exterior of a car, you want to have the styling to be as open as possible. But you also need to build 8 different vehicles down the same assembly line. So locators and clamping and things like that need to be common. And so defining that for the system turns out to be very powerful. 2 particular tools that I'll call out in standardization. The first one is PDP. It's basically a plan for every part. It's a perfect drawing plan, and it lays out the development requirements for every single part and how that fits into the greater system. The second tool is a commodity business plan, which came out of the match pair work that we did, where finance, purchasing, and the engineering group worked on a 5-year business plan for key commodities like lighting or materials, that sort of thing. One good example of that is engineering was trying to take weight out of vehicles, right? It's really critical that we reduce weight. One of the ways to do that is with different types of materials, right? Magnesium and aluminum and high-strength steels, carbon fiber. In the old days, we would have designed to those new materials, and purchasing would have got their first indication of that when we started going out for quote. Now all of a sudden they got to scramble and try to find suppliers and look for, creating footprints and that sort of thing. By working together on the commodity business plans, we were able to see that coming. And so if we were going to do more and more out of aluminum, let's say, we would make sure that we had a global aluminum supply footprint that would be able to support our efforts long term. And so this turned out to be a really powerful tool of alignment. And then the last element are tools and technologies. There's a lot of powerful tools in product development nowadays. It is fundamentally different than when I started out in the business. And it's easy to get caught up in the incredible capability of these virtual tools. Just a couple of points. One is you need to make sure that the tool supports your process and your people, not vice versa. And that you use the same technology throughout the value stream so that you're not constantly converting data, because there's huge data losses every time you do that. And not all the tools, we have a real challenge here. Not all the tools have to be high-powered virtual tools. The development plans I mentioned earlier are just simple Excel spreadsheets. Engineers can do amazing things with Excel and can really help the business. Another thing about tools is use them to make the business visible. One of the biggest challenges in product development is the work that they do is invisible. And so by developing tools like design efficiency matrices to point out what's really critical in delivering product attributes like number of dies, number of welds, different processes that have to be used, and posting that compared to your competitors turns out to be very powerful. And then quality health charts, we were working really hard to learn lessons and improve quality, and we were not successful in implementing those on a lot of our new products. And so the quality health charts helped us do that check to make sure that what we were learning out in the field was actually getting incorporated into our products. And then the final tool I'll talk about is the A3, but in a strategic way. We used A3s and master schedules as a core part of our Hoshin process that was driven by Alan's business plan meetings, his BPR, business plan reviews, that he had every Thursday. And so the whole organization was aligned around the priorities, and each layer of the functions worked hard to align to support this larger plan. And this did a couple of things for us, but the most important thing was it defined not only what we were going to work on, but what we weren't going to work on, right? And made a much more efficient use of our resources. When Alan started the BPR, this was something that was brand new to Ford. The top executives, my boss, and the other executive VPs got together once a week and reviewed the entire business in 2 hours, which is pretty phenomenal when you think about the size and scope of Ford Motor Company. But they did this through these standardized forms and metrics and only looking at exceptions, right? Only looking at problems. A couple stories about the BPR. When Alan first put it in place, they were at World Headquarters and sitting around a big conference table, and Alan saw all these other folks that were sitting around the outside of the table with laptops and big bags of stuff. And he said, well, gee whiz, I know who all you guys are, but who are all these folks, and don't they have something better to do? And the executive said, well, they're our support guys. It's our finance guy or our program guy. He said, so basically what you're telling me is you don't know how to run your business. The next week, none of those people were there. The other thing that was interesting about the BPR and says a lot about our culture is the first couple of weeks, every metric was green. Yeah. And Alan kind of stopped the meeting and said, well, wait a minute, right? You guys have been losing market share for 20 years. We lost $18 billion last year. Every program we have is a disaster, and everything's green. we must be measuring the wrong thing, right? The first guy to have the courage to actually be read in that meeting was Mark Fields, who had an issue on a launch, and Alan started to applaud. Most of the executives thought, oh, that's good. Mark's going to be out of my way. They're going to fire him as soon as he turns red. Turns out, Alan asked, who can help him? We have an issue on a launch up in Oakville. Benny Fowler, you're leading our quality group. Do you think we can get some extra quality guys up there, right? John Fleming in manufacturing, do you think we could, support Mark in some of these launches? That went through the organization like wildfire. It was just a tiny story, but that was so un-Ford-like, right, at the time, that it really signaled a big change in the culture. You could be red, and you weren't going to get killed. Yeah? Now, you couldn't stay red. You need to have a plan. You need to work on it. But it was okay, and Alan used to always say, we can't solve problems we don't know about, right? You can't manage the invisible. And then all of these tools were posted in our Obeya room. We walked the walls once a week and went through the status of our business. And this interaction turned out to be really effective. Today, when I visit companies, a lot of them have Obeyas. A lot of them have visual stuff up. And it's pretty impressive. They learned the tricks about making sure the dates are new and all that kind of stuff. But there's not much management in their visual management, right? Tell me how this stuff helps you run the business. That's what really matters. Yeah? Is it needs to make things visible to help you improve the way you run the business. That's what matters about the Obeya system. So we did a lot of changes. A few of the results. We were able to, let's see if I can read this, reduce our hours per die by 62%. We reduced our lead time on tools by 60%. I think we improved the quality somewhere around 90% on our tools. My favorite slides is the old sheet metal guy. One of the indicators of the quality of the body and stamping engineering is the fit and the finish of the vehicles, right? And so you can see on your left, I guess it is, the previous Escape. Looks kind of agricultural, actually, compared to the new Escape, right? Dramatic differences. Same thing, old Escape to new Escape. I hope you guys don't mind. I can look at these things all day. It's awesome. You really excited. My wife, I walked through the parking lot doing the chicken dance, looking at cars and see how the fit is. We were able to reduce TGWs, or things gone wrong, by 33%. And a 32-point improvement in employee satisfaction, which was really, really important to me. People liked working this way. Okay? And that's what truly matters. The one thing I'll mention is that last uptick had nothing to do with the fact they heard I was retiring the next year. Nothing at all. So clearly, Ford was able to create a new future for itself, to create a different trajectory. And at LEI, we think this work is so important that earlier this year, we started a new initiative around lean in product and process development. We're working with the global affiliates to create a number of things, starting with a website, you can see it up there, that we want to create as a hub for developers. Whether they call it Agile or Scrum or design thinking, the principles are largely the same. And so we're trying to bring together those efforts to create a more powerful way to develop new products and processes. We started a learning partnership with a number of non-competing companies that work together and not only learn from us at LEI, but learn from each other. And it's a rare opportunity to benchmark product development processes, right? Typically, companies keep that stuff really close to the vest, and this is an opportunity to dig in and not only learn about how they do it, but the struggles that they're having. And we're using that to generate new content for workshops and books and things like that that LEI does. And we hope that you'll join us in this effort. But even if you don't, I really urge you to start to work in the product and process development space at your companies, to engage with the engineering groups there, so that you can also create a better future. Thank you very much.
We've talked a lot here in the last couple of days about the last 10 years and what's coming up in the next 10 years. I hope the light bulbs were clicking on here because you just saw the next 10 years. Now, don't know how much the accounting community knows it. Manufacturing people certainly know about it. But you want to control and manage the inventory in your company? Well, you're about a year or two too late. You should have been there when the SKU count was determined 2 years ago and the suppliers were selected. You concerned about the labor cost? Well, you should have been there to gauge the DFMA a couple of years ago. What's happening in your plant today is a function of the design decisions that were made in the past. And the supply chain and production people can tweak that up and down. But that die was cast. And that's what James was just telling us. Not only that, you want to know what your costs are going to be in 2 years. I guess it depends on how well you develop and engage the engineers today. And so if we want to be good cost managers, we need to be further upstream, spending a lot more time on the design end and less time worried about what's coming out the other end of this process. But that's fantastic stuff. That may be the most powerful thing you've heard here in the last couple of days. Very, very good.